Good evening, morning, afternoon, freaks and geeks. This is Reluge, and I have another personal story for you of the haunted kind. Now, after my childhood home, my father found out that he actually had some, I forgot what it was called, a pension or something like that, from his job that he got fired from. I can't remember the details on that. However, we were able to buy a bigger house, mainly because us kids were growing, we're getting bigger. So we moved to this new house. Now, I'm not saying this part is paranormal, but keep in mind the day that we were moving our stuff into the new house, two houses next door burned down to the ground. I remember my father watching the news as we're like packing stuff, and he sees that there was a fire on that street, and he like calls up the person he bought from, and he was like, "Is this the house that we just bought?" And the guy was like, "No, no, no, no. I'm on the site, and it's like two houses down. It's fine." We're like, "Okay, good." So I do want to add, though, that almost every time I move, there's a fire nearby before I move there. So anyway, when we moved in, the house was really nice, but apparently they did have to do some, like, last minute repairs. Like, my parents reported that there was a huge hole in the living room floor that went straight down into the basement. So I was going through, we had this neat little attic room, but for some strange reason, the window was nailed into the frame. And the glass was shattered going outwards. So I brought that up to my father. I was like, didn't they say they repaired everything? Because the window up here is like broken. So they replaced it. They don't know how it broke. They thought I broke it because it was shattered out. So in the backyard, there was a remains of I believe it was like a collapsed well. Like they filled it up with dirt or something like that, and put bricks over the filled part. I can't remember exactly how that was, but there was no fear of like us kids falling in it or any cats falling in it. And I also want you guys to be aware that this is when I got married and my wife moved in while I was still living with my parents. Okay? Judge me however you want. I don't care. It's what it was. Times were tough. And I also had to drop out of school. So so on to the actual hauntings. I'm a sensitive, and I didn't pick up anything from the house. It seemed like an empty house. So some of the events that occur, I didn't jump to paranormal to begin with. Like, for example, I was laying in my bed trying to fall asleep. Both my brothers were up. They were playing on the computer. Suddenly, I start hearing someone running up and down the steps. Now, at this point, I felt like my brothers were, like, out to get me. Mainly because there was a event later, like earlier on, that made it so like my brothers had a thing against me. I don't know what was going on with that, but that's neither here or there. So I thought that it was my younger brother running on the stairs to make noise to keep me up. So I yelled, "Can you stop running on the steps?" No answer. Continues running. I'm like, "Can you please stop running on the steps? It's keeping me up." Again, nothing. So I stepped out, and it was my younger brother on the computer, and my older brother was watching TV or something. And I was like, "Who was running up and down the steps?" And he goes, "No one." I thought I had the mystery solved, and it was the cats running up and down the stairs. When my wife had moved in, she also heard it. But I was outside, like out of the room at this point. And she stumbles out and she's like, "Who's running up and down the steps?" I'm like, "Oh, it's just the cats." I turn around, there's no cats. So I'm like, okay, they like went upstairs when she came out of the room. Okay, that's fine. So she went back to bed. And this time when she came out complaining about the noise, I was currently looking at the steps. And I was like, yeah, there was nothing. I saw no one running on the steps, but there it was. So I stepped in the room with her. She went back into the bed, and we both heard running up and down the steps. I have no idea why a spirit would do that. I mean, I know why cats would do that because they're chasing each other and they're playing, but unless it was like two child spirits running up and down the steps. So my friend Zephyr also lived with us at this point. We're up watching, I believe it was Blair Witch 2. I know, it's like, ooh, it's a spooky movie. It got you guys in the spook. It was more of like a mystery movie more than a horror. Kind of like a psychological thriller, maybe. But we're sitting and we're watching it. All of a sudden, we hear a little bit of jingle coming from the front door. We thought it was like someone messing with the doorknob. So we turn off the movie and we're watching it. We hear the jingle again. Turns out it was a cat. So I just go over and I lock the front door anyway. And right when I lock it, the doorknob actually starts shaking. And there was banging on the door. And I was like, oh my god, someone's trying to break in. So Zephyr goes and closes and locks the back door, and he experiences the same thing. So we're all like, oh my god, should we call the police? The doors are locked, apparently they're not getting in. We look out the windows, and there's nobody there. But there's still the banging going on at the door. And we're just sitting there like, what the hell's going on? And then there's shaking and banging going on at the front door. And then there was banging on the window. But we could see through the window and no one was there. And then it stopped. Now, yeah, it could be like a thing where it's like we were spooked, the cat got us on edge, but the doorknobs were physically moving, and when the banging happened on the window, we could see it shaking. I'm trying to remember. It was late at night. Everybody else was asleep, so I'm trying to remember. I don't think anybody came down complaining about the noise. Really small things to note in the basement. There was like this little room. So, me and my wife took that room for a little bit. Every now and then we could hear growling, scuffles. We put most, like, scratches and banging. We put most of that as, like, the house settling and possibly mice. It was still uneasy and it was disrupting my wife's sleep, so we went back upstairs. Also, this was the time that I started having dreams where I would be in like a completely different house, but almost every time there was like someone trying to break in through the back door. And eventually I told my mother and brother about it because they were the ones that were up late. And they're like, "Oh yeah, we keep the back door unlocked." It's like, why? I go and lock the door. I don't have those dreams again. Then eventually they start up again. Turns out they stopped locking the back door. So I'm the one that wound up locking the back door frequently. Trying to remember. Oh yeah, I know houses break down and they need constant maintenance, especially since this house was in shambles before we bought it. So, uh, we couldn't seem to keep it maintained. And it was not for a lack of trying. I remember the living room ceiling cracked and collapsed on us. No water damage. It wasn't like weighted down because the wooden panels were still there. We had this accident with the air circulation. Icicle dropped right down onto the... I keep forgetting what it's called, like the central unit, the bit that's outside. Sadly, we never got that replaced, but that's for a different story. The tree we had in the backyard, 3 times it was struck by lightning. Didn't catch on fire, it was just struck by lightning. The 3rd time, though, did split it. We eventually took down most of it, like the dead parts. And there was bees living in it. That was a fun time. We could never keep the fence fixed. Stuff it kept being blown down. Tree limbs kept falling on it. This one time, part of said tree, in a big windstorm, knocked the chimney, like the top part of the chimney, off and damaged the roof. And that started a domino effect of leaking and, like, mold growing in the walls. And we kept trying to get, like, the roof fixed, but every time they either use shoddy nails or super glue to try to, like, keep the tiles down. And every time there was, like, a strong storm, it blew the tiles off. But like I said, I know that that kind of stuff happens. But in comparison of all the other places I've lived in, especially, like, compared to the length of time that we lived in the houses, this one received the most damage for some reason. Not saying it's paranormal, just in case it is, I might as well archive it. Alright, so we went and picked up one of Zephyr's friends, and we were driving back to the house, and she started being like, "Oh, hey, I remember this neighborhood." And she's like, I think we lived down here at one point. We go to our street and turn onto it, and she's like, "Yeah, this is the street. This is where I lived." And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." We pulled into the driveway, and she's like, "Holy shit, this was my house." And we're all like, "Are you serious?" And so before we went in, I had her describe it. The biggest thing that really solidified to me for it was the fact that there was a well. So, she and her mother had some paranormal stories for us. We were all like, "Oh, great, here we go." Just listen to this. Apparently, whoever slept in the room down on the first floor, the room that I slept in, heard someone running up and down the steps. I told them, "Oh, it was probably cats." And they're like, "We didn't have cats." It's like, dogs? No, we didn't have any four-legged pet. And she didn't have a sister or a brother. It was just her. So, there was no explanation for someone running up and down the steps. They had an issue in the attic where the window would not stay closed. They kept closing it and it kept opening. So, they were afraid like someone was breaking in. So what they did was they nailed the window down. And I was like, that would explain why the window's nailed when we moved in. And they said that once they got it nailed down, the window shattered from the inside. And I was like, that's how the window was. But it only did that before we moved in. It didn't do that afterwards. So, they also had, there was something in the backyard that was mentioned, but I can't remember. It had to do with the wells, so they closed it in. But there was this one story that we didn't experience. But they described the shadow man that would walk up from the basement. It didn't do anything to them, but they were deathly afraid of it. Like, it instilled fear into them to the point where they ran out of the kitchen. but it never walked past the threshold between the basement stairs and their kitchen. Now, we never experienced any kind of shadow man in that house. So that was so creepy. We couldn't solidify that story. So, this was also the house that my father died in. Unlike with my grandfather at his house, there was like nothing going on that we could link to my father. I mean, he always did like this kind of thing when he was happy, and he always had like a face full of stubble. So it made this like scratching noise. Never heard that. And hearing like everybody's like, we would like smell something from him, like his like the perfume he uses or they use, or like a cigar or something like that. There was nothing. So I don't think our father haunted us. But several things happened after we moved out because the house became condemned. Not paranormal. It's just we couldn't keep fixing the house. So we had to sell it as is. And I know a couple of the stories because the person that bought the house became our next landlord. He complained that we didn't fix the window in the attic. I told him we did at the beginning, but then we didn't need to. And he explained that it shattered from the inside. But then he fixed it, and it shattered from the inside again. So he replaced it with plastic, like a plastic window thing, and it stayed fixed. But then it kept opening. So he was like, I understand why you guys have it nailed down now. And I was like, that wasn't us, that was the previous owners. And he was just like, They also witnessed running up and down the stairs while they were fixing up the house. They even mentioned, like, while they were fixing the plaster in the one bedroom, it was, like, hard enough that it started shaking some of the loose, like, dust and plaster off of the parts they were working on. But the main thing is, when they fixed it up and they rented it, my mother was living next door at this time. And the guy that was renting the house walks up to my mother and asks, and this is like the first week he lived there, and he asks, did someone die in that house? And my mother's like, I'm not sure if anybody died before we moved in. Hey, if you notice what she did, she didn't tell him about my father. We didn't get any details from him, though. Just that he was creeped out and he didn't stay past a month. So, I think he was experiencing some shit that really scared him away from the house. Also, at one point, hearing the landlord talking to, like, his people fixing on our house that we rented from him, he mentioned he brought up his frustration that he couldn't keep the Clearence house rented. And I was just thinking, it's like, So either we didn't mind all the hauntings that was going on, or other people are being haunted more than we were. But, like, why didn't the Shadow Man show up? That was really really interesting, especially considering what happens later. But that's all the paranormal events that I can remember that happened at the Clearence house. So, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Theories? What's your take on the Shadow Man? Remember, be polite. Be a decent human being in the comment section. Don't call anybody's theories, including mine, like stupid or dropping the R word. Well, it's come to the fact that I feel awkward using that word. Because I used to use that word in jest. Because not making fun of anybody of mental illness is more making fun of the people that use the word in a negative light. But anyway, click on whichever thumb you think is appropriate for this video. And until next time, stay white and nerdy.